close the door up here. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube. Lots of gems, lots of we still don't know what we're going to talk about. Lots of, we really do not ever know what we're going to talk about during the lives. But let's get to it!
He is unstoppable, unbeatable, unbelievable. He's Alex Richter, the Kung Fu Genius.
And every day, I practice martial arts.
Watch out!
Word is, I'm a Kung Fu genius. Practiced all day like a genius.
All right, here we are. We are alive again, and it's always a little chaotic.
Again, somehow.
Apologize to you guys. We're running a little bit late. A little bit of chaos in the studio today.
Thanks to Mikey Deane.
We recorded 2 episodes today without Mikey Deane.
Somehow.
Our poor sound guy has a bit of the flu. And was sick and wasn't able to help us out for the earlier episodes that we recorded.
Man.
But he made it in literally at the 11th hour, exactly at the 11th hour to be here to get our live set up. He came in at 4:52. And the live went on at 5 p.m. So welcome, everyone.
Awesome.
Today's live episode is going to be about Bruce Lee and MMA because this is a dead horse that I don't feel has been kicked enough in the martial arts world. So I figured I'd put my 2 cents on this dead horse and then bury it and never talk about it again as a huge
tough one to bury.
Bruce Lee fan and MMA fan kind of talk about that a little bit.
Let's try it.
So
let's try to bury this.
Yeah, so he came in with COVID, the poor guy. That's what they said. No, I think Mikey Deane just has the what is the flu from Great Britain?
Bird flu.
No, not bird flu. It's the
Walrus
foot
flu.
and mouth disease. What is that called?
Cow disease.
Mad cow disease. That's right.
Mad cow.
Dre's got the foot and mouth disease. That's what's up.
That's my shit.
So here we are. We'll talk a little bit about Bruce Lee and MMA, what I think about it, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, since it is alive, we'll take whatever questions we can get from the audience.
We'll do our best to get to all of them.
We'll do our best to get to them. Dre will be a little bit on that tip, checking that out, because I'll be pontificating over here on Bruce Lee and MMA. So first, a lot of topics to talk about when we talk about Bruce Lee and MMA. How would a Bruce Lee fared if he had done MMA? What would Bruce Lee have thought about MMA? All those kind of things. There are lots of topics that tend to overlap. First thing I would say is, like, if we talk about the meatiest of all the topics, how would Bruce Lee have done in MMA?
He would have been a bad champion. He would have been
the heavy
from Masvidal.
He would have been the heavyweight champion at 127 pounds for sure. All right,
Ngannou.
Yeah, he would have definitely beaten Ngannou.
Oh no.
30 seconds tops. All right,
yeah.
Ngannou would have tripped and fell and knocked himself out. Right.
Right.
So anyway, I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan.
Yes.
Been a Bruce Lee fan since I was 8. I think Bruce Lee's one of the most innovative. Or was one of the most innovative minds in martial arts. He was definitely someone who saw things that other people in his time period didn't see. But this is a different question as to whether someone would be able to physically dominate in a sport that would exist 50 years after their time, right?
Okay.
And so the problem is a lot of Bruce Lee fans have a really hard time divorcing what Bruce Lee did in the movies with what he did in real life and what he was capable of doing in real life. In RL, right? And in fact, like, there's the video footage of him doing like the 3 or 2 finger push-ups or whatever, and people are like, yeah, Bruce Lee used to do push-ups on 1 finger. Now we literally have video footage of him doing the 2 or 3 finger push-ups. We don't have video footage of him doing 1 finger push-ups, but I'm sure there's someone out there who's like, he could do no-handed push-ups.
No finger push-ups.
No finger push-ups,
right?
And so the problem is that even like stuff that we can see, all right, things that we have like, video evidence of. People are still embellish the living shit out of that. And Bruce Lee was someone who was really quite phenomenal for his time period in terms of like his mind and how he thought about martial arts. And he was like a traditional martial artist in the time of the 60s who understood that boxing and wrestling were really effective martial arts, and that it's not about being bound by a style, and like it doesn't matter how many techniques you supposedly know, it only matters what you're actually able to do. And he understood that in a time period where people thought that if you could break bricks, that automatically meant you would kill someone if you hit them with that hand. He understood that that wasn't the case. So when you look at Bruce Lee in that kind of context, he was well ahead of a lot of the other people at that time period, all right? But does that mean that Bruce Lee from the late 60s would have been able to just walk into the UFC 50 years later, like if you just Dre Ison hypothetical him into the UFC cage across from a Demetrius Johnson or across from anyone else, that he would then perform in a way that we would expect.
Mighty Mouse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In a way that we would be like, oh yeah, he would just go in there and just annihilate. I don't really think so. And I think the first person who would admit that would be Bruce Lee. The big problem with all these hypothetical questions about how Bruce Lee would have done in MMA is they're all argued with the air of Bruce Lee thinks he would have beat everyone in MMA 50 years from the time that he died. And Bruce was someone who respected boxing. He understood how dangerous boxers were. He understood wrestling, how dangerous wrestlers were.
Right.
And I think that if he had the chance to see modern MMA, like if someone gave him a video in 1969, be like, yo, people are going to be fighting like this 50 years from now, I think he would see that there was clearly an evolution in the way people were doing things. Yeah. Because in his time period, he had to tell karate point fighters that maybe they should move around and use some head movement and use some distance and feints and stuff. That's different from someone who starts martial arts learning that from the beginning and also learns wrestling and all of these other things and things like that. So I think that Bruce would have been the first one to admit that, wow, in order to compete at this level, a martial artist has to have all of these skills. It is essentially the justification of Bruce Lee's ideas, but it has already evolved at a point that was way beyond even where he was at that time. So
he would have been blown away looking at it.
I think he would have thought it was great, and I think he would have definitely seen like, oh wow, this is definitely an evolution, but it was all along the lines of thought that he was already talking about, right? He said things like, you know, a boxer has to be able to, you know, to stop a judo man. I mean, I'm totally butchering this saying, 'cause I got 4 hours of sleep last night, so I apologize. Yeah. But you know, it was like, you have to have a boxer that can keep a judo man from grabbing him, and you have to have a judo man that can keep a boxer from boxing him. And he already said things where he kind of understood like striking and grappling and the different strengths and weaknesses and stuff. And so the problem I always have with like the Bruce Lee fanboys is they cannot differentiate Bruce Lee from Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee in real life in a cage against another fighter. And I find that is the biggest disrespect to Bruce Lee. Because it's like you being this like ultimate fanboy that cannot imagine that Bruce Lee could be defeated by another high-level athlete is actually misunderstanding what Bruce Lee was talking about. And it's actually causing, in my opinion, a lot of disrespect to Bruce Lee's ideas and to his memory. Because he's not the one going around saying, like, he at that time, he said, yeah, he has confidence and he doesn't have any fear of anyone around him. Yeah, because, you know, you look around the people who are prominent in martial arts at that time, he was way ahead of them. But it is now 50 years later, man. All right? And I think Bruce would have been the first one to recognize it. His fanboys nowadays, they do not understand the difference between, they think like what Bruce Lee did to Bob Wall is literally what he would do to Anderson Silva if he was in the ring with him or something like that. It's like, no. Okay. And the first person to tell you that a real fight wouldn't be that way would have been Bruce Lee. So I think Bruce Lee is getting a lot of undue criticism as if he was somehow from beyond the grave the one making these claims, when it's just a bunch of misguided man-children who don't understand the difference between movie fighting and real fighting. And Bruce Lee was someone who understood the difference between both. And I think he would have been the first one to admit that this was something kind of new. And if he were to compete in that, he would have to go and learn a few new skills because of his long-range striking and sidekick and straight lead, and those things could not keep one of these guys from coming in, and suddenly he was in a grappling situation. I don't know if he I don't know if he technically had the skills to be able to deal with that situation, but I think he would have wanted to learn them right away and improve upon that, right?
All right?
And then, of course, there's always this other thing about, there are too many rules. Look, all right? Bruce was definitely one of the guys who understood the problem with rules and how you cannot compare that to real fighting, right? And of course, he had his boxing match against Gary Elms, and because of the boxing gloves, he wasn't able to put Gary Elms away, although he won the fight. But that was one of the things that turned him off about rules. And I think when Bruce was really hardcore about rules sucking, all right? He's talking about point fighting karate, which was just which was essentially just glorified tag with hands and feet. When Bruce was talking about rule sets and how they're constrictive to what you really need to be able to do in fighting, I don't think he knew that something like MMA would exist, all right? And yes, MMA has rules, can't do 12-6, can't gouge out the eye, can't hit in the groin.
Man.
But you know what? Neither can the guy you're fighting.
Yeah.
So the thing is, if you can't beat someone with rules, what makes you think you can beat them without? All right? And I'll tell you something, all right? All of these guys who are like, yeah, man, in a real fight, I'll just BG him in the eyes and I'll just punch him in the throat, kick him in the knee and do all that kind of stuff. Dude, if GSP stood in front of you, all right, and you can BG him in the eyes, you can punch him in the throat, you can kick him in the knee, you can do whatever illegal technique is not allowed in MMA.
Yeah.
I think he has you on the ground in 12 seconds and he's punching the shit out of you or choking you with your own arm. Because it's one thing to theoretically understand how you might stop someone using all these kind of things, and it's yet something else to actually be able to do it against a trained athlete that has speed and athleticism and is not going to let you do that. And the first one who would have recognized that was Bruce Lee. Man. The fact that Bruce Lee said you have to be able to hit someone in the eyes, you got to use your whole body, you got to be able to do this or whatever, doesn't mean that he was some unrealistic fantasist that thought that someone who outweighed him by 200 pounds, he's just going to flick him in the eyes and that guy's going to fall like a cheap suit. He understood that. It's the fanboys that don't get it. All right? Man, and look, mixed martial arts has rules, but it's pretty much as unrestricted as you could possibly get, and it still be a sport. All right? You look at John Jones. John Jones uses those so-called oblique kicks. A lot of guys are using that lead leg side kick or whatever, and it's a very, very effective tool. But no one, with rare exceptions, I know Khalil Roundtree, I think, busted someone's knee pretty bad with that lead leg side kick. Yeah. But for the most part, knees are not breaking backwards because people are doing straight lead side kicks to the side. All right? Accidental eye gouges happen all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And that definitely shows you the effectiveness of an eye gouge. Well, they have the chance to recover in between. Right. But I don't think that if you allowed eye gouges that would be that would be the thing that stopped every fighter in their tracks. Yeah. I think if Conor McGregor was allowed to eye gouge Khabib Nurmagomedov, I think Khabib Nurmagomedov still would have won. So I don't think that these things that people think, the rules of the fight, there's no rules. I think you're talking out of your ass. I don't think you've actually ever stood across from someone with cauliflower ear whose neck is the same diameter as his head and be like, I'm just gonna eye gouge this dude and stop him, right? Yeah. So I think that there tends to be a little bit of an issue with people overhyping those kind of things. Boxing Lounge, let's go, champ.
Nice.
Thank you for the £5 donation. That's our favorite nation.
Yes,
donation.
The donation.
And who else we got? Topher $4.99 release the Tang Sang cut.
Appreciate.
So, and again, like I talked before, it's like, look, how good would have Bruce done in MMA? Without any training in MMA, just kind of as is, I don't think he would have done that well. Had he known about it and had a chance to train it and started at a lower level, I think he would have had the chance to do something with it. But the problem is you cannot just say sight unseen. You would put him into a cage with the lights and everything like that, and he would be Tang Long from Way of the Dragon against anyone you put in front of him, right? And so I think that it's unfair to Bruce Lee to say that he would do all these things when Bruce Lee himself was not the person to say that. All right. And a lot of, like, Robert Klaus, the director from Enter the Dragon,
Right.
He said in his book that Bruce Lee said, you know, I mean, if he really fought against Muhammad Ali, well, I mean, Muhammad Ali is much bigger, and I mean, look how small my Chinese hand is, or whatever. People got really upset about that because they were like, nah, Bruce Lee wouldn't say that. No, Robert Klaus has said some BS from time to time.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what, and this is just my opinion, and people can disagree with it, and I'm totally fine with that. I will go to sleep at night and not give a shit.
Hi, you okay over there?
Yeah, right, Mikey Deane?
Don't make me laugh.
I have a feeling that
missed this
that
guy.
actually sounds like something Bruce Lee would say.
Yeah.
When you listen to the Dan Lee phone conversations and you hear the respect that Bruce had for boxing, and talking about how those Chinese martial artists really didn't have any clue, and if they were in there with a boxer, they would be in big trouble. Even though they only have the two tools, meaning the two hands, they're much more effective, much more efficient than these guys with all of their so-called techniques that they can't use. And like, I would take a really, really sharp boxer over someone who knew eye jab and leg break kick and arm break and all of this no rules nonsense. I would say the boxer would light his face up any day of the week, right? Because it's one thing if you have applied those techniques under the stress that high level athletes have practiced those things under, and it's another thing to just hypothetically think you're going to flick an eye jab because you have a training dummy at home and you can flick eye jabs on that thing really, really fast. Yeah, it's another thing when a dude whose neck is the same diameter as his head with cauliflower ear charges into you not giving a crap. Okay, and Bruce, I think, would be the first one to admit this. His fanboys are the ones who don't get it. It's not Bruce Lee who didn't get it. They are the ones that don't get it. So, you know, and then of course there's the other thing. So if we go a little bit further, so first of all, I think that the question is kind of stupid because I think Bruce Lee, he was not the person who would have talked shit about that. I think he would have liked it. But the other thing is you really have to look at people in their time. You know, when you look at people in their time period, you have to see what are the innovations they made. When you look at Bruce Lee in the landscape of martial artists in the 1960s, he was well ahead of his time in terms of equipment training, in terms of cross training and different things, in terms of fitness and cardio being an integral part, and strength training being an integral part of what a martial artist should do, and not just how long you can do the Sunam Tao form for, and all these kind of fantasy things that traditional Chinese martial arts people think are going to create the difference between the guy who goes in the gym and hits the heavy bag and trains and spars, but you can do the Sunam Tao uninterrupted for an hour and somehow you're going to floor Ngannou with your elbow power. These people have another thing coming to them, right? But you have to be fair and look at people in their time, right? I also think that a lot of boxers from back in the day, no matter how good they were, I think they would have had a really hard time with some modern boxers of the same weight class, even the ones who are not as good as those other boxers were in their time period.
Okay.
Because the modern boxer, for example, grew up on what those other guys have already done. We are standing on the shoulders of the people who came in front of us, all right? When people go like, yeah, of course you're going to mix different martial arts and you do pad training and it's not about styles, it's about how good the fighter is or whatever. Yeah, you say that now because of people like Bruce Lee who broke those barriers a long time ago. All right. But he was the guy who said it in a time period where people thought if you were a black belt in karate and could smash a brick, that meant you could kill anyone. The old rumor that if you had a black belt in karate, you had to go to the local police station and register yourself as a deadly weapon. People really thought that even in the 80s when I was doing karate, I remember like my parents' friends who were much older, like, they would ask me seriously, like, do you have to register in the local police office as a deadly weapon? Like in the 80s, people thought that. And in the 60s, Bruce was like, that's a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
You have to look at people in the time period. Nowadays, of course, people know it's not like that. You can have someone who's a decorated champion. That guy could get starched on the street by a nobody, right? Or you have someone who's a high-level Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy get choked out by someone who's not as good in jiu-jitsu but just had a better night. Yeah. Or you have a striker like Gokhan Saki, who's like a high-level kickboxer, goes to UFC, actually gets knocked out by someone who's not nearly as good of a striker as Gokhan Saki. All right? Because the moment you introduce these different variables, it changes the game. And I think Bruce Lee understood that, and I think his fanboys don't. All right. So you got to look at people in that time period, like Helio Gracie. Without Helio Gracie, there would be no real Gracie Jiu-Jitsu as we know it. If you took Helio Gracie in his prime, okay, maybe in the 40s, all right, his prime in Jiu-Jitsu, and you put him against anybody in his weight class in Jiu-Jitsu nowadays,
Okay.
he would not stand a chance in a Jiu-Jitsu competition. And if you put him in a no rules fight like the ones that he did back then with anyone from MMA now, Helio Gracie does not have a chance. So are we going to go, oh man, well that guy totally sucked, that guy didn't do it? No, because you have to look at people in their time period. What challenges did they face while they were alive against the people who were the best at that time? You can't then go 40, 50 years in the future to people who grew up knowing that stuff and taking it as a given and go, yeah, of course. Yeah, it's obvious. Yeah, I mean, Bruce Lee used focus mitts when he was training in martial arts. It's a big deal. Everyone uses focus mitts. Yeah, now, buddy.
Now,
all right, but back then people were doing katas and breaking stuff and thinking that's all you needed to do, hitting Makawara boards and stuff like that. So, and if we look a little bit further into the ideas that Bruce Lee had, about movement and distance and timing or whatever. I mean, these are things that are absolutely vital nowadays to be successful in mixed martial arts. So I think mixed martial arts has legitimized a lot of Bruce Lee's ideas. And I think it doesn't matter how he would have done. I particularly don't think he would have done that well just the way he was in the 60s and certainly not in the 70s. Look, when Bruce was like movie Bruce, I think he would have done worse. All right? Because when he was movie Bruce...
the Dragon Bruce.
Yeah, when he was movie Bruce, he wasn't training as much sparring stuff with his students because he was in Hong Kong. He was doing mostly physical fitness to stay in shape. And he wasn't like teaching and sparring regularly like he was a little bit earlier in LA. Plus, let's not forget, he had a horrific back injury in 1970. All right? Bruce was in a lot of pain during that time period, and I think his movement was compromised. And, also, let's not forget about also his extracurricular activities at that time. I don't think movie Bruce, that sharp-looking Bruce that everyone thinks, I don't think that even would have been the best version of him. It would have been probably before the back injury, right? So so I think people they just don't realize it. He also wasn't necessarily in fighting shape, all right, to fight professionally. And when I say Bruce Lee wasn't in fighting shape, yeah, he had good cardio and he was well conditioned, but this is not the same as what you need to fight in mixed martial arts. And if you don't believe me, just grapple 3 5-minute rounds with a mid-level jiu-jitsu guy. Just roll
a little.
Just roll.
Yeah.
3 5-minute rounds, super light rolling. All right. And to tell me what that feels. This is a totally different style of conditioning, right? So anyway, and people always say, oh, it's not a sport. It's a sport. It's not the real deal. That's nonsense. If I locked you in a cage right now across from Francis Ngannou, there would be nothing more real in your life than what was happening in that moment.
That's that RL right
You wouldn't go, oh, this is just a sport. If I locked you in the cage with someone your size, if I locked you in a cage with an MMA fighter, lighter weight class than you,
that's a problem.
There wouldn't be, oh, this is just sport. This isn't real. Nah, man. That guy can knock you out.
Yeah.
That guy can break your arm. That guy can break your leg. That guy can put you out. That guy can also just take 3 or 5 rounds and bust you up. It is very real. The difference between street fighting and sport fighting is not the rules. The difference is this. In sport fighting, you have 2 willing participants.
Right.
In self-defense, you have 1. The person who's attacking you is a willing participant. You, the defender, are forced to be there to defend yourself. This is different psychologically. It's not because of the rules. It's absolutely not because of the rules. The whole, it's just a sport, it's not real, is only said by people who've never actually tried that and who don't understand. If you are doing sparring with a mixed martial arts guy, okay, with mixed martial arts rules, he can punch you, kick you, take you down. That's pretty effing real, even if it's just sparring. And don't tell me that if you were allowed to use all your street fighting techniques, you're going to stop that guy from taking you down. Get out of here. This is sex being explained by virgins, okay? All right? They need to stop with that shit, all right? And so,
Showed up.
so anyway, all right?
There he is.
That's right. Okay, so Here we go. Bob, don't hit back. All right. So what else we got?
Yeah.
Bob Wall, Robert Klaus,
Get
beef.
to some comments.
Yeah, let's
We
get
got
to
any
some
questions in here?
I don't know. Like
I don't
a
think
lot
we
of people
have.
chiming in. Three-legged Lee. Hey, who wrote Three-legged Lee? That's not even. Did you write that?
I did not.
Who wrote Three-legged Lee?
Where is that?
That's written under the Kung Fu Genius. I'm the Kung Fu Genius. Who wrote Three-legged Lee? Did you write that?
Must have hacked your
Mikey.
phone.
I'm like, who hacked my phone? Who's writing this? Me? I did not write Three-legged. Bruce did have the nickname Three-legged Lee, Lei Samger
Lee.
in Cantonese, right? Because first that nickname was derogatory from the first director of Big Boss, the one who was later fired. He just called Bruce Lei Samger, which was Three-Leg Lee, but he meant it in a derogatory way because Bruce could only do 3 kicks. Because he wanted Bruce to be able to do more operatic style stuff. And Bruce would just do, round kick, the side kick, and spin kick, right? It's like, oh, he's just like a 3-kick pony, right? But then, of course, later, that nickname meant because Bruce was so fast, people thought it was like he had 3 legs, right? Because he would kick you so quickly. And then later, when he got the reputation as a ladies' man, Three-legged Lee got yet another meaning, right?
Like
so,
a kickstand.
That's right.
Yes, that's tripod.
Yeah. So anyway, what do
Look at
we
him.
got here? Unbeatable. Yes. Who is unbeatable? Sex explained by virgins. Yeah. I mean, look, the sport versus street fighting debate. First of all, I hate the term street fighting. Okay, like really, because all the guys are like, "Yo, in the streets" or whatever, dude. Nobody who fights in the streets talks like, yo, but in the streets, bro. All right? First of all, if you're fighting in the streets, all right, then you're literally just committing assault or you are just deciding to do assault with someone else. All right? So is this really what you're a normal person with a 9-to-5 job and every once in a while you and some other dude decide to commit assault on each other, right?
It's me in the park, bro. Take it out back.
It's like, are you talking about street fighting or are you talking about self-defense? All right, okay? Because the moment your hands are up, the other guy's hands are up, and you're going back and forth, those are 2 willing participants. You cannot explain to a judge, no, bro, that's self-defense. If your hands are up, his hands are up, and you're going back and forth on the street, no, man, you're fighting, and fighting is illegal, all right? You want to do that, then even out the playing field, put on some gloves, have some rules, and then go for it, right? But the idea that like, oh, well, on the street I can pull his hair, I can gouge out his eyes or whatever. Look, if someone is a good wrestler or a good boxer, you are not going to grab their hair. You're not going to gouge out their eyes. I don't care how many times you hit the bob dummy or you break the paper with your finger jab or whatever. This is
Sparring with paper.
Yeah, but you have the sheet of paper hanging and then you flick it so quickly you go through it like, oh yeah. See, people do stuff like that and it's not easy. That's a skill you have to develop. I mean, you're still not stopping Brock Lesnar from taking you down. All right? You're going to flick that eye jab towards him if you even don't crap your pants when he's standing in front of you. And he's going to duck down. Your finger's accidentally going to hit his skull. You're going to bust your finger. He's going to pick you up. He's going to slam you so hard you get knocked out from the slam. And he's just going to be punching your corpse at that point, right? And so this is a big problem because, again, the assumption is that Bruce Lee is the guy telling you about, well, if it's on the street and you can do anything, that means you can beat anybody, all right? Look, the other thing that people forget about this stuff is that, all right, I said before, if you can't beat someone with rules, what makes you think you could beat someone without? But here's the other thing. If you're having your hypothetical street fight, bro, all right? Yo, I don't fight in a cage, bro. I fight in the street. Said no one who actually fights in the street ever, all right? Yo, bro. And you're standing across from GSP, right? You're like, yo, bro, the street rules, man. No MMA rules, all right? Well, guess what? That also means GSP can gouge out your eyes and kick you in the groin, all right? And if I'm looking at you,
ways in the street.
Yeah. If I'm looking at you who most of your martial arts experience is YouTube comments, all right? And I'm looking at GSP, whose most of his experience is being an effing UFC champion.
Right.
And now he's also allowed to gouge out your eyes and kick you in the nuts, all right? I'm putting my money on GSP.
GSP.
All right?
It's a two-way street.
Yeah, people people just don't get it. This is just sex described by virgins. Okay, they read a book once.
Yes.
Bruce, yeah, and look, there are legit differences between self-defense situations, sport fighting situations, and fighting on the street and fighting in the gym and so on and so forth. But it has mostly to do with psychology. The difference between two willing participants and one willing participant is huge difference psychologically. There is a difference in jiu-jitsu practice, whether you're doing it for sport or MMA or street fighting, all right? And I know this because I've trained with the Valenti brothers in Miami, and their Brazilian jiu-jitsu emphasis is self-defense. So when they teach jiu-jitsu with the idea that this guy can also punch and kick you. So you have to be able to tie the person up so they can't punch you when you bring him to the ground. All the pins and holds you use are specifically to stop this guy from punching you to do head control. When you do sport jiu-jitsu, which is just the grappling end of things, and you don't have to worry about someone punching you, now you don't have to worry. The way you clinch, the way you make grips on the gi, the way you engage with the person is different, because now you're just worried about the guy grabbing you, taking you down, and putting you in a submission.
No punches.
You're not worried about the person punching you or whatever, right? And then of course there's jiu-jitsu for MMA, which is then adapted to the rules of mixed martial arts and is a lot closer to the way it is done on the street. But having trained with people who do sport jiu-jitsu at a high level, like Magno and the Henzo guys, right? And by the way, they also do MMA and self-defense. And then also going to a pure self-defense approach from the Valenti brothers, it is very different, because the way you approach your opponent or your partner is very different if the guy can punch or kick you, right? Those are certainly some differences, all right? But I will still tell you this. If someone is really good at sport jiu-jitsu and doesn't know anything about striking, and you know the fancy eye gouge and the throat punch and the knee kick and all your super Denmark techniques or whatever, I'll take the guy who only knows sport jiu-jitsu to just take you down and choke you with your own arm over your hypothetical stuff. Now, if you spar regularly and you start to work these techniques into some kind of resisting sparring against someone who actually knows those techniques, I would be more willing to listen to what you have to say. But all the hypothetical stuff this is not coming from experience. This is coming from, your idea, all right? That, on the street, I'm just going to do this and the guy's going to fall apart, all right? Not going to happen. Not going to happen, all right? The better fighter always wins. The fighter who's better trained is always going to win. It's not a matter of your secret revealed knowledge that you know these 3 forms, and in these 3 forms, you have these movements. It doesn't matter how many forms you know. Only matters what you can do, not just what you can do in the class, but you can do under stress. And most people have not tested their techniques out under enough stress to be qualified to say half the shit they're saying in the comments. They just say it because it sounds right-ish, but this is not coming from experience, right?
Darn it.
Yeah. So anyway, all right, so what else do we got here? Boom. Well, I thought you just said that in a street fight there's only one willing participant. No, I meant self-defense, all right? Not street fight, because, again, I don't really understand street fight, all right? When most people say street fight, they mean self-defense. When we say self-defense or real talk, those are also two different things.
Street fight is more like, let's take this outside.
Yeah, all right?
Let's take this out back, or let's meet after school.
Right, exactly. And that means you have volunteered for that. Yeah. All right? That's not self-defense. Yeah. That's not justifiable, and it's not legal. Yeah. So you're fighting why? All right?
Street fight.
Street fight, bro. All right? He looked at me funny, bro.
Yeah.
He's wearing the wrong color, bro. All right? I just don't like how he is, bro.
Oh, man.
So we got to go out and we got to if I can beat him in a street fight, then my opinion is correct. All right? Does that make sense? All right? That's how the world works. All right? Kimbo Slice, rest in peace.
OG
the OG Street Fighter. Yes. And even that had rules as street boxing. I remember first time I saw Kimbo Slice fighting. I was like, wow. And he that dude's eye popped out or whatever, that one fight. It was crazy, man. Yeah. Ooh. And he was primarily a boxer. All right? And he was a very good street fighter, street boxer. Didn't do as well in MMA. All right?
Why is that?
Well, because he didn't have all the tools, and he didn't have the cardio, right?
The cardio got him.
Right. So you look at someone like him who, on the street, was wrecking dudes.
Yeah, but he had good cardio in the street. Is it because it was outside?
Yeah, but also don't forget he wasn't kicking and wasn't wrestling. Okay. The moment you add kicks, that changes the cardio.
Oh.
And the moment you add wrestling, super changes the cardio. Super changes the cardio. All right. So again, if you're not used to practicing in those kind of setups, you're literally doing something different. All right. You're literally doing something different.
Street boxing.
So your efficiency and effectiveness in one realm does not guarantee that efficiency and effectiveness in another one. So you could have Kimbo Slice who like, look, if you're at the bar and some dude starts some shit or whatever, who do you want behind your back? You want Kimbo Slice.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah, hell yeah.
But now we're talking about, okay, now
street.
we're going to put him in a ring against someone else who's trained at a really high level. Okay, then maybe not, because this is like a different thing, all right? And so Bruce could have been the fastest with the kicks and the punches and could have been able to fell any of the point karate guys in the 60s or whatever and beat up whatever Chinese extras and chase Wong Jack Man around there or whatever, but that doesn't mean that translates to him in the ring with someone who has a good grasp of striking and grappling and submissions and Muay Thai, right?
Wow.
David Reynolds, what? $499.99.
No,
holy cow!
That is in the red right there too.
Well, we're gonna make this the David Reynolds episode. All right, whatever you want to talk about, David Reynolds, I will talk about for the rest of the episode. $499. Yo,
didn't I tell you my favorite nation?
Donation. Hey, you know what? Next time, coffee's on me.
Yes.
I'll let you guys
Coffee's
get
on
some
David.
sweener, and you get the fancy coffee. All right.
I get a latte.
Thank you very much, David. That is above
I
and
was
beyond.
If I read that correctly.
What we would ever ask for. Definitely appreciate it. If you have any questions, you will always get priority, sir.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. You fight an island where the only way to escape is defeating martial artists in a tower-like game of death. The last martial artist you fight is Beardy, and the final Dryson. See Part 2.
Oh.
Part 2. How will you do it? Remember, you can also work together with the previous guy you defeated. Will you work with Beardy to defeat Dryson? See Part 3. Part 3. Will you throw a coconut, for example, in his head that you found on the island? Holy cow! Yeah. Well, David Reynolds, thank you again. Thank you for your. I cancel my order on the wall bag and purchase some rattan rings because of you. Well, then I'm glad you're really paying attention to the underlying theme of Kung Fu Genius, which is the most important thing to focus on is rattan ring training. This is the highest level you have. You know what? I take everything back. If Bruce Lee trained with a rattan ring, he'd be able to defeat anyone in mixed martial arts.
That is legit.
The thing that was missing from Bruce Lee's training was rattan ring training, and if he had that, Brock Lesnar would have no chance.
We figured it out.
Wow, but this hypothetical back over here, right? Fighting on an island, going up a tower. The last martial artist you fight is Beardy, and then the final Dryson. Okay. Well, you know what's weird about both Beardy and Dryson is they are both imaginary characters. All right. Somewhat. That's like saying like, okay, the last two you fight is Beardy and Dryson. It's like, okay, you have the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny as the final ones that you're fighting there, right? Man. And that's like, holy cow.
It's what you imagine it to be.
Yeah. Dryson, as far as I can tell, is some dude in disguise. All right.
I mean,
he's trying to clown off of your name a little bit. I suspected Mikey Deane for the longest time.
No, but when he was here the other day, we kind of got a visual.
Yeah. It was like Michael Jackson and LaToya. For the longest time, you never saw them in the same room, and then you did, and then you're like, okay, maybe they are not the same person. So I don't think Mikey Deane is Dryson. You were obviously in the same room as Dryson. I don't think you're Dryson.
I mean, he felt the wrath.
I was in the same room as Dryson. I'm certainly not Dryson. But I think Dryson still might just be someone playing a character. So it's still a bit of a fairy tale. Yeah, absolutely. And Beardy is some dude from Eastern Europe or from Scandinavia.
Think Scandinavia.
Scandinavia. And he's pretending to be someone. Yeah, your roots.
Yeah.
Very clearly your roots. And I don't think either of these two are real.
Might be my cousin. Long lost cousin somehow.
But I can imagine, you know, because Beardy had those videos where he's talking about how he trained, and he used those two different photos, which we did the reverse Google image search on, only to find out that those were two different people, and none of them were named Beardy or whatever his McAllister fake name, whatever, right? I think Beardy weighs like $105.
Wow.
And so I think that I would defeat Beardy just by slapping him across the face because he's just probably just a tiny man-child.
No.
And then I would grab Beardy by the ankles and I would spin him around and use him to defeat Dryson. I would literally beat Dre Ison with Beardy.
That's a good plan.
And I think that's how you would win.
Plan of execution. Right?
I think that's how it would work. And then once you knocked out Dre Ison, you would go up to him and you would pull his mask off like at the end of a Scooby-Doo episode.
Of course.
Right?
And it's who?
And then you would find out, I don't know, that it's...
Mike Tyson.
No, it's one of the fake Bruce Lee clones, right? It's Bruce Lee, Bruce L.E., who got so pissed off that I called him the four-stripe Adidas of Bruce Lee imitators.
Yes.
And it was like, and I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling KFG and TFG.
Yeah.
All right? So anyway.
Wow. Bruce Lee.
But thank you again, David Reynolds. And yes, I'm glad we could steer you on the correct path, which it's all about the rattan ring, the most important piece of training equipment ever devised. All right, so here we go. What else we got? Oh, Junction Street Tigers. By the way, we just recorded an episode today. We had a question from Junction Street Tigers, and I answered it. As a matter of fact, I think it was the top of the episode question.
It was about Ligers?
Ligers. No, it wasn't about Ligers. All right,
No?
that's what you thought it was.
Ligers don't reproduce. They can't reproduce.
We literally recorded it today. So just, hey guys, in live time, I've always complained about how Dre jumbles facts. All right. We recorded this earlier today. He's already messing it up. All right. That gives you the idea there, right?
I'm just trying to give my man David his money's worth.
Yeah, Beardy will make you believe he knew Bruce Lee, but as a respective Lee, he wouldn't fight with you.
Okay.
Flash Arrow, Junction. Did you ever have a Bruce Lee or dream or self-defense dream? You know what? I don't know if I've actually ever dreamed about Bruce Lee.
That's interesting.
It's possible. All right. I've dreamed about weird stuff.
Yeah.
I've dreamed that I was in Kung Fu movies. Like in a Kung Fu movie universe, like not like I'm shooting a movie, but like I live in what is essentially the universe of a Kung Fu movie.
All right.
Yes. Could they be the same person? Yeah. Frank O is wondering if Beardy and Dre Ison are the same person. And sometimes I suspect that. Beardy is probably jealous of I have 5% knowledge about Bruce Lee, whereas Beardy has like negative 16% knowledge about Bruce Lee. And he's probably 16. He's probably a little salty that I can prattle on a little bit and say some like Bruce Lee stuff. Mm-hmm. So maybe Beardy created Dre Ison and his hypotheticals to just burn time on the Kung Fu Genius and make us look ridiculous and keep time on the podcast where it's not me talking.
That is a theory.
Where it's like this other dude. Yeah, no, but this is not the first time someone thought that Beardy and Dre Ison are the same person.
What?
Yes. All right.
This is great.
Ninja Boy, Dre Ison is the whole reason I watch KFG.
What?
Which is funny. Dre Ison gets a lot of love, but he also gets a lot of hate. It's right down the middle.
Yeah.
Right down. Some people love him, some people hate him. He has been asking better questions lately. But here's another thing you might not know. Not just Dre Ison, but you, Dre.
Yeah.
Last weekend I was at Angela Mao's restaurant.
Yeah.
And I met with Charles Damiano, which we did an episode, the Bruce Lee collection, Hector, all these people. And the first thing they asked me, where's Dre? How come you didn't bring Dre? I want to meet Dre. And Charles Damiano said he was disappointed when he came here to do his episode because you were not here. And I'm starting to think that you are taking some of the shine off of the KFG.
I would never even try to attempt.
No, I start to feel suddenly you're trying to take over the reins. You know what, Dre? If you want this show, that's fine. You can have it. All right?
I have no...
All right? It doesn't have to be the KFG anymore. It could be the TFG, that effing guy.
TFG
all right?
show.
And
weird.
Someone also in the comments said, could we do an episode where I ask the questions and you answer them? And I'm like, are you serious?
That's a whole different show.
Can you imagine?
Show.
You know what we can do here live on the KFG live episode? What? We can do that as a hypothetical. We can do an Ask the TFG anything. All right. So let's say I'm Dre. All right. Let's say right now.
No.
Hypothetical.
This is not going to happen.
Hypothetical.
We can't,
all right. We're doing. It's not the KFG podcast anymore. It's the TFG podcast.
TFG
all right. That
podcast.
effing guy. All right. And I'm just the sidekick. All right. I'll do the intros instead. All right, peeps. On today's episode of That Effing Guy, the TFG is going to answer all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube. Lots of gems, lots of nonsense, lots of you wanted it, you got it.
No.
Let's get to it. All right. There you go. So now, you go, yo, KFG, how you doing?
Yo.
All right? And I'll go, hey, all right. So here we go. All right? So now ask a question. All right?
Wow.
All right? So.
This is bananas.
Okay.
The tables.
All right. I got a question for you, TFG, right here.
Okay.
So, during Bruce Lee's time, I'm just reading this off here, right?
Oh,
during
no.
Bruce Lee's time period, most of the karate that was famous in the States was point-style karate.
Yeah.
But as we know, during that time in the late 60s, full-contact Kyokushin started to come into prominence.
You're reading this right now.
However, it was not famous yet.
happening.
What do you think Bruce Lee would have thought of full-contact Kyokushin karate?
What do I think of? If
It's your show. Why you say, what do I think? It's literally, can you imagine if I answer, what do I think? We're asking you, TFG. You get to be me. Someone wanted this hypothetical.
First off, the TFG show would not even be about kung fu.
It would be about hip hop.
It would be
All right.
about.
It would be about you and me doing the Humpty Dance rap, which we did, by the way,
we
right?
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be something along my wheelhouse.
Yo, the real John Rubio, thanks for that donation of $9.99. Thank
out.
you so much. We definitely appreciate it.
It would be about donations in the nation. Okay,
That's what's up. Appreciate
what
you guys.
Bruce Lee would have been like.
What
okay.
would he have thought of Kyokushin karate? Being that karate at that time period was mostly point fighting, very unrealistic. Kyokushin,
Real
it was
tough.
full contact, real
Yeah.
tough. They didn't have boxing punches to the face, they punched to the body, but it was definitely a step up in terms of intensity and realism. What do you think he
He
would
would
have
have
thought
loved
of?
the intensity of it. He would have loved the challenge of it.
This is all vague stuff.
Yeah.
When I tell these stories, like, well, in 19
It's-
Blair, he
it's-
said this.
yeah.
He said, listen,
Yeah.
people really want this episode. You answering questions. Oh, I think you would have liked the intensity. Oh, really? Go on. Let's go. Let's hear it. What else?
People are asking too much
Uh-huh.
of the TFG. That's all I gotta say.
That's all I gotta say. What do you think he would have thought of the founder of Kyokushin, Chojin Miyagi?
He would have respected him.
Even though it was actually Masoyama who founded Kyokushin. Got it. All right? Okay. So there, ladies and gentlemen, was your hypothetical episode with the TFG answering
went
questions
really
instead
well.
of me. All
That
right?
went really
He's
well.
just vibing.
There you go. Junction Street Tigers, have you ever been to a Bruce Lee film location? Did you feel his presence?
Yeah.
Been to multiple Bruce Lee film
Yeah.
locations, right? And also just been to places that Bruce Lee has been, not just film locations, like
And
in
where
front of the
Bruce Lee
leaning,
is
in
now.
front of the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Okay.
Been obviously to Bruce Lee's grave. You definitely feel his presence when you're over there. I stood in front of what used to be Bruce Lee's childhood home, which is a mall now. So the actual building is not there anymore.
I
The one on
remember
Nathan
that.
Road. I
I
took you guys
remember
there.
that.
And even though it's just a mall now, you look down Nathan Road and you're like, yeah, I used to walk here. I took you to Bruce Lee's
36 Cumberland Lane.
41 Cumberland
41.
Road.
41.
66 Cumberland Lane, 41 Cumberland Road. All right, you and your jumbling, right?
Lane.
So I took you to his house. We went to his elementary school. I showed
Yeah.
you that.
Was that
Yeah.
Xavier? Yeah.
No, we didn't go there. No, I actually took you to his, St. Francis Xavier was essentially his high school,
Okay.
his secondary school. The British system is a little different. They have primary and secondary school. Yeah, so definitely felt that. Went to a couple Enter the Dragon locations, so Chingshan Monastery. I didn't take you guys there, but that's where the whole finger pointing away to the moon thing is shot. You definitely feel that there. Plus, they have like a cardboard cutout of Bruce up there, so you're like, oh yeah, it's like he's right here, bro. And but actually, one of the coolest locations where I really kind of felt Bruce
Okay.
was in Hong Kong in Aberdeen. It actually closed down, unfortunately. There's a floating restaurant called the Jumbo Restaurant, which is actually a very touristy thing in Hong Kong. It's a dim sum joint,
Yeah.
but only tourists go there. And
Floating restaurant.
Yeah, and it's basically a big ass boat, and it's a restaurant. And I took Justin and Nicole there. And you
Okay.
got to take like a little boat to get there. And that's the harbor where they shot, at the beginning of Enter the Dragon, where he's on the boat and they're having the
Yeah.
flashbacks. It's that harbor with all the boats there. So when you're going there and you look around and you see all those same kind of boats in there and all the junks and stuff, you're like, yeah, it totally
dope.
feels that, right? And oddly enough, I don't know if anyone caught this. I know it can come off a bit disrespectful, but I'm not trying to be. But if you look at Enter the Dragon and you watch when Bruce is on the boat and there's an old Chinese guy who's moving the boat,
Yeah.
that guy looks eerily like Grandmaster Yip Man.
He
And I always
does.
thought it was kind of strange. It's almost like the Sifu is rowing his student, which is not right at all. So anyway, so I definitely did feel that. Hey, Filipino guy, wow, Steve Alex did the intro in one take when I did the TFG
Yeah.
intro. Yes, I often do it in one take. Dre, on the other hand, not so much.
Not so much.
Dre behind this, he's trying to cause a rift between you two. That's so funny. All right.
Rising.
Boom. What else we got here? What is the martial arts scene like in NY Chinatown, and do you think Chinese martial arts will ever have the resurgence among the younger generation? No, I think Chinese martial arts, for the most part, is dead. I think Wing Chun, because of its connection to Bruce Lee and Wing Chun being on, Wing Chun people are also, I think, more willing than other Chinese martial arts to modernize a little bit. Like, you have more Wing Chun people who might, if they're not integrating boxing or jiu-jitsu, they're at least addressing it in terms of their training. And I think you're more likely to see that in Wing Chun than you are in some of the other martial arts. In terms of the super traditional Chinese martial arts, I really don't know how many generations are left of that kind of stuff. The New York Chinatown scene has kind of died down quite a bit.
Okay.
And there are only really a few schools left, and even some of the old pillars of Chinatown are not around anymore, or they're not around in the same level of, their former glory years. Unfortunately, Sifu Boyat passed away over 20 years ago, and his school is closed down, and some of those pillars, they're kind of gone. Even the big pillar of New York Chinatown, which was BLT, the martial arts store, which used to be on Canal Street.
Yeah.
Back in the day, they used to have a huge billboard with Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris. And then later they moved to Mulberry Street. That place closed down. Well, that place was sold. The old couple, Mr. and Mrs. Yu, who were very good friends with Sifu Lang Ting, I had a chance to meet the owners. They sold it to a young guy. And that young guy got the idea to move it to Flushing out of NY Chinatown. And he moved it to Flushing. He got a business partner. And in the middle of the night, a few months later, his business partner left with all the money and disappeared. So
wow.
That was the end of BLT. Yeah. And so, no, I don't think so. There's really not a lot of Sifu left teaching, and a lot of the Chinese Sifu don't teach very professionally, unfortunately. So, the martial arts scene is not what it was. For people who've never been to New York but are kind of old school kung fu heads, you probably imagine New York to be like The Last Dragon. Like you go down to a bunch of rival kung fu schools and stuff like that, and it was maybe a little bit more like that in the 80s. It's certainly not that way now. If I had 5 minutes with Bruce Lee, what would you say to him? Stay away from Taiwanese women. All right? If you meet a Taiwanese woman, you turn around and walk away. If you meet an actress who speaks Cantonese with a Mandarin or Taiwanese accent, you turn around and walk away. What's really funny? I've heard a lot of interviews with Betty Ting Pei speaking Cantonese. And Betty Ting Pei is from Taiwan, where she would have spoken Mandarin. And she was an actress who went to Hong Kong. And obviously in Hong Kong, they speak Cantonese. So she had to learn to speak Cantonese, which is not uncommon. A lot of Taiwanese actors that move to Hong Kong, they can pick up Cantonese pretty quickly. Angela Mao is from Taiwan, went to Hong Kong to make films, learned to speak Cantonese. Lu Feng from Venom's fame, from Taiwan, went to Hong Kong, learned. I spoke Cantonese to Lu Feng, even though he's from Taiwan, because my Mandarin is shit. So I spoke Cantonese to him and spoke Cantonese to Angela Mao, even though they're both from Taiwan. It's kind of not normal. And I would assume that like Chiang Xiang, like Gong Sang, who's also in the Venoms, but he passed away, he probably also spoke Cantonese. So, but I actually saw a video of Betty speaking Cantonese around the time of Bruce Lee's death, which would have meant that was kind of the level of, because I've heard her speak Cantonese like more recently in more recent interviews, and her Cantonese is like, it's good. It's like, she speaks Cantonese well. But I heard her speaking Cantonese around the time of Bruce Lee's death, and she's like mixing Mandarin words, and her accent in Cantonese was pretty terrible. And I can imagine Bruce Lee, who did not really speak Mandarin, that must have drove him nuts, because she didn't speak any English.
Shit.
So he's like having to communicate with her in like this like gibberish kind of mix of it. And so I would just say, if I had 5 minutes with Bruce Lee, stay away from Betty Ting Pei, stay away from the cocaine. And if I told him those two things, he might still be around. All right. So what else we got here?
A donation question.
Another donation. All right. Cool. Oh, another $9.99.
Real John Rubio.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, question for Sifu Alex. I'm a Wing Chun student in Colorado, Duncan Leung lineage, and want to make a commercial for our Kun. Wow. How would you best represent all members of and their motives for training?
That's a really great question. So the first thing I would
You
explain.
Made a commercial back in the day, I remember.
Yeah, and I've also made a lot of mistakes when it comes to marketing, and this is a topic that I study quite a bit. I'm not doing a great job with the podcast, marketing the podcast, but other things I've done a little bit better. But that's okay. The podcast I do for fun.
Yeah.
And we got 6,000 people who kind of like it. So the first thing I would say is don't do what all the other martial arts, especially traditional martial arts people do, which is they make it about the style and they make it about the lineage and how important their teacher is. Because when you want to market to people, your school and your lineage is not the hero of the story. The student is. All right? They're the hero that is going to go on a journey, and you are the Yoda character, but they are Luke. And so your marketing has to be with the student in mind, because when people look at something, we are the main character of our own stories. And if a school talks about, well, our lineage is from blah, 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 and we teach the most authentic and blah, 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 whatever, you are making yourself the hero of your own story, which is why people tune out.
Okay.
So you need to make the student the hero of the story. What is this going to do for them? What is the journey going to do for them? How are they going to transform by learning at your school? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, how would I best represent all members and their motives for training? I wouldn't. Because when you try to speak to everyone, you ultimately end up speaking to no one.
Yeah.
I would first start by who is your main audience? Who are what is the demographic of the people who train at your school the most? I'm just guessing, because I've also taught Wing Chun for 20 years. Adult male, 35 and older. All right? So market to that person first. Because that is the effect. Wing Chun is all about being efficient. You're not efficient by marketing to the 3% of people who might come to your school. You find the main group that's going to come to your school and market aggressively to that group. You will also get people from other groups as well, but don't spread yourself too thin, especially when your marketing budget is small. Then go for your main demographic, and you make that person the hero of the story. Not your school, not your lineage, not your style. All right? So that's what I would say.
All right. Frank O, thank you for the 20.
Yo, thank
Word. He has a question too.
you. Here we go.
KFG, do you know if Bruce Lee was able to perform full splits, both front and box splits?
That's a great question because, performing the splits is like such a big feat in martial arts, right? You see, especially among northern Chinese martial arts styles, the late Sifu Lao Fat Mang, the grandmaster of the Eagle Claw, Lily Lao's father, famously he's doing the splits and he has his hands up in the position. A lot of those styles, they do those splits and things like that. And obviously, once we went into the Van Damme era, doing the splits is like a big deal, and you see a lot of martial artists do it. Oddly enough, you never actually see a photo of Bruce Lee doing splits. You see photos of Bruce Lee kicking high, especially sagittal plane front kicks.
Yeah.
All right. His side kick had good height on it, but it wasn't that what the Chinese call yatsi ma, which is the character one stance, where he's doing the side kick fully vertical up like this. Like you see some high level Taekwondo people, or maybe even someone like Scott Atkins or someone like that do it. You never actually saw Bruce Lee do that stuff. All right. It's actually possible to be able to kick high and not be able to do the splits. I don't know if Bruce was able to do side splits or I guess what you would call here box splits, right?
Wow.
I don't know that, but I'm not saying he couldn't, all right? I've never seen it, all right? When you see him like lift up and kick both of his legs up, like in those photos where he's on the trampoline, it's all at an angle. He's actually not in the split. And that was a trick that Bas Rutten also did. Bas Rutten, his logo, after he would win a fight, he would jump in the air and he would kick both of his legs up to the side. And it looked like he was doing a full split. But even Bas said, no, I mean, like when you're looking at it head on, my legs are up like this. They're not all the way in a split position, right?
Okay.
So Bruce had a really good forward bend, like you see at the beginning of Way of the Dragon when he's warming up and he does a full forward bend, like full chin to shin.
Right.
So I think he probably could have done a front split.
Okay.
But he might not have been able to, because remember, if you do a forward bend, that means you have good flexibility in your lower back. and on your glute side of everything, right? But in order to do a front split where your leg has to go back, you need to have that front hip flexor has to be stretched. And I don't know if Bruce had hip flexor mobility, but I'm not saying he didn't. I'm not trying to trigger any Bruce Lee fan, but Bruce Lee could go over splits, and he would do splits 8 hours a day, every day, right? Like, I don't know, all right? It's quite possible, but I actually don't know. Don't know. All right, cool. We got time for a couple more, and then we will be done. I see a lot of Chinese martial arts from all different styles in New York, Columbus Park during the weekends. Chinese martial arts seems pretty active there. Yeah, you got some people who practice in the park in
Columbus
Chinatown.
Park.
Yeah, you got some people, but for local New Yorkers, you see some guys in there who have legit Tai Chi skill or push hand skill, occasional Wing Chun guy or occasional guy who knows something. But you see a lot of what they call in New York Kung Fu bums. They call them Kung Fu bums. And anyone who's lived in New York for a time period has seen a Kung Fu bum. There was a Kung Fu bum on the train the other day. I got on the train, I sat down, and diagonally across from me was a Kung Fu bum, and he was there, and he was twitching, and he was yelling, and he was doing like all sorts of stuff in there, and everyone around him is scared shitless. They move, they change, and we're just sitting there like, yeah, it's another Kung Fu bum, all right? And so sometimes you look at the dudes who are practicing in the parks, and they're Kung Fu bums. They're in their mind, and you go like, whoa, dude, look at this dude's form. And you know what I say? It's like, yo, that dude's not performing a form. In his mind, he's fighting 10 ninjas right now. In the world that guy, he's not doing a form he learned from a Sifu. No. In that mind, he's actually having an epic final battle with a number of ninjas, and he is an EDP, an emotionally disturbed person. So, but again, what do you see? 5 people practicing in the park, doing different styles. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's indicative of a vibrant martial arts scene, Chinese martial arts scene. And why? And the fact that you see people training in the park is actually an indication that the Chinese martial arts scene is not vibrant. Because you know why they're practicing in the park? Because they don't have a school. Because there's no brick and mortar school for them to train in. That's the problem. They are relegated to practicing in the parks right now.
That's right.
All right. And the fact that, oh no, this guy doesn't have a school, he's not commercial, he must be real. That's not true. The fact that some dude teaches in the park doesn't make him any more legit than someone who actually has a brick and mortar school. So, that also needs to be swept under the rug a bit. All right, let's close it up here. If you guys have any final remaining comments or questions,
I have a question.
Go ahead and put that in there. What's up?
Here.
Yeah.
Where can we listen to the KFG theme song?
Oh, that's great. If you guys want to hear the full Kung Fu Genius rap song, which is written by Kess the MC, which is a legit hip-hop artist. Shout out to Kess the MC. The best place to listen to it, because I think we have an instrumental only, and then we have the full version, is on SoundCloud. So if you go to SoundCloud and type in Kung Fu Genius, Kess the MC, you will find it there as well. All right. Kung Fu Bums.
What about Sicilians? KFG, do you know whether Bruce Lee dubbed his own screams in movies? Did he scream with that high pitch in real fight sparring?
So we talked about this a couple times, like the origins of Bruce Lee's kind of cat cries and stuff like that, whether that stuff was dubbed later by a voice actor, whether Bruce Lee had done that, whether he recorded that live. Because remember, Chinese films were shot without sound. So in terms of what the noises Bruce Lee was making while he was shooting those, we don't know because it was shot without sound.
Yeah.
Sync sound didn't come to Hong Kong films until much, much later. They basically dubbed everything, mainly because those films were redubbed anyway into Mandarin for the overseas audience, because a big percentage of the overseas Chinese audience were Mandarin speakers, so they dubbed them into Mandarin for international release. And even in Hong Kong, they would often release them in Mandarin with subtitles, but often they would eventually come up with a Cantonese dub. But the weird thing is, even in the Cantonese dubs of a lot of those films, whether we're talking about Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan or Sammo Hung into the 80s, so you watch a Sammo Hung movie from the 80s in Cantonese, and that's not even Sammo Hung's real voice speaking Cantonese. Those are voice actors. So this is really difficult. I don't know. It's come up from time to time, and need to talk to someone, maybe Bay Logan or someone who's more knowledgeable on these things than I am. I don't think I can actually answer that question.
What was Bruce Lee's favorite thing to order at Burger King?
Wow. Wow.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable, right?
Wow. You never heard that one?
We got here at a Chinese New Year event. I saw a Tai Chi Sifu doing no-touch moves, flicking his hands out, students falling around. Have you ever seen that happening yourself? I've seen video demonstrations. I've never seen someone actually say they can do that or come up to me and say they can do that. And Clayton Robinson, thank you so much for the show. Can't wait to get back and watch all the full stream. So thank you guys. This was a lot of fun. We did Bruce Lee and MMA for majority of it. We answered questions. We got amazing donations. Thanks again, David Reynolds. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. So this week, we'll put the audio of this up on, on Spotify and all those other places. And we'll put the guys. You guys can obviously watch the video again. And next week we'll be back with a normal ass episode of the Kung Fu Genius. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Kung Fu Genius, and you can watch Dre slapping Dre Ison on Instagram. Look, a few days ago, it was right after the whole Will Smith, Chris Rock thing. As a matter of fact, it was the day after. Coincidentally.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. And thank you so much for coming. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.